Everything here visually and audibly really makes sense, but the gameplay doesn't really have the same kind of vibe that you're going for. Hi there, welcome to Games Over Coffee Consulting. Game developers give me their games and I give feedback on their game design. My name is Devon, and today we're looking at a game called Moonrabbit by Nanomega. I got some interesting vibes from this game. It's like kind of a horror game. It's very atmospheric. It's kind of hard to categorize this game. Just everything in this game screams like mystery, right? Mystery and metaphysical inside of spiritual kind of stuff. You have these kind of glowing rabbits, these moon phases playing in and out of the theme. You have these big, really cool murals that are all over the ground. You have these enemies that kind of remind me of the Death Stranding handprint enemies. They have these huge red eyes that are really the only things that are floating. You know, it's really creepy. You know, you're literally playing as just a rabbit, the most innocent thing ever, and you have these things that are, you know, trying to catch you. You're trying to make sure that your light doesn't go out in this very dark atmosphere. So the whole thing has this really big vibe to it. So it's obvious that the dev was looking to try to exude a certain type of atmosphere in this game, and they really have done that. But this is the strange thing, was when I was playing the game, it doesn't really feel like the game has a cohesive thought. The gameplay loop seemed incomplete somehow. So usually a gameplay loop, right? What you're doing is you're formulating expectations for the player so that they understand what to do in order to go forward. The goal in this game is to reach one of the rabbits that are inside this big dark maze by collecting this big red sphere. The only issue is that you don't really know where the sphere is, so you just kind of have to explore until you get there. But what's hard about that is that the navigation in this game is all hidden because everything is very dark around you. So you kind of have to explore out of necessity. It's a little weird in theory, but actually in practice it does kind of work. I found myself never really getting lost because I kept collecting those spheres. There are these circles at the bottom of the screen that I think represent how much light you have. I'm not exactly sure. But again, I didn't feel like the game was pushing me in a certain direction. And I think this has to do with how the game was planned in the first place. So the questionnaire that this dev filled out had a question that said, what kind of experience are you hoping to deliver with your game? Something like that. They said they were trying to create an atmospheric experience of exploring in the dark and not knowing what to expect. When I saw that, I looked at the game that I was playing and I was thinking, well, this game is more of just an action game, right? It's based on action. It's based on you moving from one point to another, in necessity. Like there's an external pressure, there's an external timer going on here, pushing the player into one type of area. I was thinking, well, maybe there's a disagreement here. So I emailed them and tried to ask them what was going on. Did they want gameplay that more exuded that kind of explorative vibe? And what they said was pretty interesting. They said, I guess as you said, atmospheric and exploring are more related to how I intend the game to feel rather than the actual gameplay itself. Earlier versions of this game had different gameplay, which was adjusted over time based on player feedback to make it easier for the player to understand what they need to do. Originally, the game involved the player slowly exploring a dark maze alone with a time limit, trying not to have their light extinguished by the enemies nor for it to run out by itself. So I'm not sure exactly what the goal would be in that game, but it's clear that the game that was here in the beginning is different than the one that they ended up with. They said based on player feedback that they had to clarify the goal about like what it was that they had to do. Players kind of found the game boring because they didn't really understand what to do. So they added these spheres and stuff to make the game feel like it had a direction or more of a clear-cut goal. So it was kind of like this idea that was there that wasn't fully realized, but then became realized in a different direction. I feel like that's what happened. One of the things that this reminded me of was this video by Errant Signal that talked about wind states. And he talked about how wind states contextualize play. If you give someone a wind state, then it typically makes their gameplay go toward that wind state as much as possible. So I think that's the reason why this game felt like it was clashing a little bit with me, or why there was an incomplete game loop, because the game seemed to be recontextualized because it put in this goal of trying to get to this rabbit like it was a challenge in front of me. And it was no longer about this experience, which I feel like was the original intention. If the original experience of this game was about exploration or about running into enemies that you didn't expect to find in the dark, then I feel like the gameplay needs to be more about that. And what I mean by that is that typically when someone makes a game, they start out with the gameplay first, right? And that's what every game designer will tell you, is that you start out with gameplay. I've even said that on this channel before. Start with gameplay and then add your story later. And the reason why I say that is so that your story has context with it, so that the story is about the mechanics that you're using. But you don't really have to start explicitly with the gameplay, not all the time. You can start with an idea, and that idea can give birth to an experience that is then, turned into gameplay. So it's that kind of progression that I feel like would work in this game. I'm not exactly sure what specific experience you're looking for here, but I do believe that if you're looking for this more explorative kind of vibe, where you said you're trying to create atmospheric experience of exploring in the dark and not knowing what to expect, then I feel like gameplay that would complement that is more of a survival type of game. And I know that this game is tagged as survival, but I think there's key differences here. The reason why I think about this game as an action game is because there's an external pressure present. And when you think of survival games, a game like Minecraft, where you're trying to survive, or The Forest, which is a horror survivor, a lot of those types of games have kind of open-ended goals. There's no external pressure to make the player go forward in a certain specific type of win state. You kind of need the player to motivate themselves to go whenever they want to. When a player feels like they need to explore something, it's mainly because they want to. It's not because the game has asked them to do something. When a game has asked the player to do something, it's then contextualizing their play to go forward in a very specific type of way. You have a challenge in front of you and you must go that direction and do these things one after the other. Whereas exploring is more about the player trying to feel out the area by themselves. So a lot of times that kind of self-motivation that happens is because of an open-ended goal. So if you think about Minecraft, for example, Minecraft doesn't have a specific goal in it. And I'm not saying everything has to be as open as Minecraft, but Minecraft is an example. The main thing that the player tries to do in Minecraft is collect certain things, right? They have to collect certain types of ore to get most of the stuff in the game. But of course, this ore is underground in just random places. So the player has to dig and start exploring. They know what they want to do, and they go that way to try to find it. Same with a game like The Forest. The Forest is a horror game that has to do with survival and exploration also. And in that game, you explore to gather materials in kind of the same manner in order to survive nights. I haven't played The Forest. Then there's also a game like Tears of the Kingdom or Breath of the Wild, where you have this kind of open area. You have different points of interest that you can go to if you want to. I'm gonna go over there because I feel like I should go over there. There's valuable information, or there's valuable something over there. When I'm playing Moonrabbit, because I have such explicit goals to go to, I don't really feel self-motivated. I feel like I must do one thing, therefore I'm going to do that one thing. And the other part I want to talk about is the darkness that's involved here. The darkness in Moonrabbit feels like it's there as a gimmick, and I'm not saying that because it feels cheap, because it doesn't feel cheap, but the way that it's applied feels a little strange. The scares are good in this game. It gets a really good scare out of me when I'm going forward and then suddenly an enemy pops up. It feels like the darkness is only there for the enemies to pop up and scare you, and that feels like that's the only reason. Because navigating a maze is very difficult to do when you can't see the maze. It feels like I'm not given enough control over the area for me to get to the areas that I want to get to. The only time that it does feel that way is when I collect those spheres that makes the walls visible all like everywhere. If you think about a game again like Minecraft or Tears of the Kingdom, there's areas in those games that are very, very dark, but they're not dark just for darkness sake, not just so you can enter the dark and be scared of enemies that are coming through, but they're dark because they're hiding something valuable. If the player already knows that there's something valuable over there in the darkness, then they go into the darkness because they want to, and the darkness kind of adds a mystique over everything. So in the case of Moonrabbit, I do like the idea that there's darkness at play, but I want to feel as if there's some sort of information that the darkness is hiding that I need to go out and explore. And then there's the idea of the horror of the enemies themselves. The enemies, like I said, did scare me when they popped up, but beyond that, they weren't giving me a dread sort of sense. To give that kind of dread, I feel like you want to look at games like Soma or Alien Isolation or even Slender Man. This kind of dread that comes from the enemy is made from the player imagining where that enemy is going to be at a certain time. In Slender Man, this happens a lot. You're always imagining that he's just outside of your view. Same with Minecraft. If you're going into a cave, you're hesitant to go down that cave and you're keeping your ears open because you really want to know if there's going to be a threat. You always imagine that there's going to be something there. That dread comes from the expectation. The player knows that the enemy is somewhere in that area and they're scared to go in that area because they imagine that the enemy's going to be there. Because Moonrabbit is just full of darkness at all times, it feels like the enemy could be anywhere at almost any given time, and you would think that that would make it dreading, but it doesn't really, because it makes it feel like everything's the same. Because everywhere feels the same and there's no point of contrast, it feels like the enemies lose their significance. I'm not imagining them in any specific place. If you imagine, for example, if the whole game was lit and there was one space that was dark, and you knew that the enemies only existed in the dark space, you go to that dark space and that's where you imagine, oh geez, there's going to be an enemy, they're going to pop out any second, I'm going to die. And I think when the player understands what is safe and what isn't safe, I think they start to formulate an expectation of what danger should look like. And so because of that, they formulate dread when they get to those certain parts of the game. What I'm thinking about with this game is thinking about trying to turn that explorative kind of horror vibe that you wanted into the gameplay, rather than trying to add gameplay moments that you feel like could clarify player direction. You told me that when players played this game, it wasn't as interesting to them as some of your other games. And I feel like it was probably because the experience that you wanted wasn't necessarily communicated in the gameplay. It was communicated, I think, in the atmosphere. Everything here, visually and audibly, really makes sense, but the gameplay doesn't really have the same kind of vibe that you're going for. So if you wanted to turn that kind of explorative, discovering things in the dark into gameplay, I feel like you could give the player just one big area and kind of just give them certain things to go and collect. If they know what they're trying to get, but they don't need to get them in any specific order, then it kind of just opens up the area to let the player kind of explore on their own. And in this game specifically, you could even have the player like come across those murals. You could somehow make it so that the murals themselves are maybe the things that the player needs to collect. I really love the murals in this game. I thought they were really cool. You asked me whether or not the gameplay was conflicting with the experience and whether you should continue with a game like this, and I really feel like that's up to you. When you are developing the game, do you feel like there's a missed opportunity, and do you feel like you need to keep going, or do you feel like you should scrap it and continue to the next one? I feel like there's a lot of potential for it and that you could make a different game out of it, but that's just me. I mean, that's just how I see it from this side of things, you know? If you feel like you've done what you've wanted to do, then that's great. But if you don't feel like that, and you don't want to go back to this type of rabbit stuff and you want to go to something different, maybe take that same idea that we talked about here and just apply it to a different game entirely. Or if this is the type of thing that you want to do, maybe make a sequel out of this game. Maybe you like having the murals, maybe you want to keep using the same types of things, but make like an anthology type of sequel where you have kind of the same universe, but just a different game entirely. I hope what we've talked about here has provided you with some sort of idea of a direction that you want to take, you know, your game or maybe another game in the future. But I do see a lot of potential with a game like this, and especially with that type of vibe. I definitely look forward to any type of development that you have further with this game, or a game that you want to take this idea into, because I really like that kind of stuff. So definitely keep me posted, as you have been on the Discord, which is great. And if you're not the developer, you should check out the Discord, check it out. I know this developer is actually already a Patreon of mine, so that's pretty cool. You can join Patreon if you want to. That supports both this channel and my main channel, or you can buy me a coffee. There's a link down below. If you're a developer who is not this developer and you have a game, please submit it to me. I have like a very short queue at this moment, so if you submit your game, there's a high chance I'll cover it pretty soon. Thank you for your time, thank you for watching, and I will talk to you guys later.